Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Doctrine, Dogma, and Davide podcast. My name is Davide, and I am your host. And today, we are pleased to be joined by special guest Brian Schnoor. Brian, say hello to all the dozens of people that may or may not even be listening as they drive to work.
Hello, Davide's family.
So, I want to start off with just sort of like what your background is, a little bit about your faith journey, and then, of course, we can talk a little bit about the main thing that I wanted to talk to you about, which is, of course, abortion. So you are currently a doctoral candidate at George Washington University, is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so what are you doing with them?
So, basically, I'm working on my PhD, I'm working on my dissertation. I graduated from George Mason University, which is how I know Davide. We were roommates for a while. So I graduated with a bachelor's in bioengineering, and so now I'm working on a doctorate in biomedical engineering at George Washington University. Basically, I'm focusing on cancer research and specifically metastatic cascade and developing a way to reduce metastasis, as well as some other drug delivery applications. I don't want to go too much into it because some of that jargon was starting to go over my head, and I've heard you talk about this 1,000 times before. So that's also fair, and also, of course, when you're publishing stuff, you don't want to necessarily share too much of it over a platform where it can,
over a platform where it can what?
Be disseminated ahead of your actual publication.
I see.
So I'm publishing this work. So when I'm talking to you, I talk a little bit more in detail. But when I'm,
I see. So
when you're publishing something,
so you're saying that I could leak classified information from your laboratory,
but
sensitive information then.
Yeah, it's fair.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I'm trying to publish my research, so if I talk too much about my research in your platform, someone else could get a similar idea and publish
and
it lessens,
steal your research.
Yeah, it lessens the impact of your research, if nothing else.
Okay.
Not that I think that someone could catch up to us necessarily, but
all right, you guys are so just far beyond everybody else.
No, I just you know what I mean. And
you're good.
Also, my PI might kill me. I'm joking. My PI is lovely and wonderful and would never hurt.
Don't worry, she's probably not gonna.
That's fair. Yeah.
So, tell me. Have you always been Catholic? I realize it's a little bit weird for me to be asking you these questions because we've had these conversations, but I need to be a good host. So
I understand. So I was cradle Catholic in that regard, in that my parents raised me Catholic, which I'm so grateful for. Definitely, middle school, early high school had that kind of phase that I think a lot of us go through, where some doubt and some questioning. It can be very hard to be faithful, especially with the society the way it is.
Right, yeah.
Definitely is a challenge, and I definitely went through that, but really, I credit a lot to my youth ministry, to the influence of my sister, when she started going to the high school youth ministry and bringing along her bratty younger brother to really helping me stay in the faith in that, and really delve deeper into my faith rather than just being that kind of surface level pro forma.
Right. Yeah.
Go to mass on Sundays if we can make it type of.
I mean, it's really great that you were able to find a strong youth ministry program, especially what diocese did you grow up in? Because you were in Indiana,
West Lafayette.
West Lafayette. Okay.
Yep.
Because I don't know that much about the diocese. I know that you have spoken relatively highly of the diocese.
Yeah.
It can't be nearly as great as the Diocese of Arlington. It's simply not possible. So
you can't have me talk against my home diocese, man.
You are an Arlington diocese man now.
This is
you are literally
fair.
Wearing an Arlington diocese shirt.
Yes.
And I've got my Arlington diocese mug here.
Oh, very nice. I have that at home.
I know.
Anyway, but yes, Arlington diocese is wonderful. Love Bishop Burbage. Yeah, love the diocese.
Of course. So you went to youth ministry, and they helped you sort of delve deeper into your faith.
And
so,
then,
yeah,
you know, and
go
then
ahead.
of course coming to Mason, there is a wonderful Catholic community at Mason. The CCM, Catholic Campus Ministry at Mason, is fantastic. At the time, John Moore was at the helm.
He left now.
Yeah, now he's a full-time youth apostle. Well, he was always a full-time youth apostle, but you know what I mean. Now
Man, it's so crazy that like John Moore's got, because like he was there for what, 20 years?
It was his only job out of college. Like he's been there since he graduated college.
So like more like 30 or 35
he's not that
years.
old. He's younger than he looks.
Is he?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like,
Sorry, John.
yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway, I digress.
That's still crazy because like I remember I spoke to him a couple years ago, and I talked to him. This was shortly after Father Serby left, and Father, let me see, who is it now? It's Father Farrell, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Father Farrell's great, by the way.
I should get to know him more.
Yeah, you should. He went to the Pontifical North American College in Rome.
Oh, that's cool.
So like you know he's smart.
True.
But I was talking to John Moore shortly after Father Farrell came, and I was just like, man, it really just seems like chaplains come and go, but John Moore is forever, you know?
But yeah, he's moved into the directorship for youth apostles, which is...
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah, which is great. And we're lucky to have him.
Yeah, he's the one that brought you into youth apostles, right?
Yeah, it was kind of a combination of definitely John Moore. I would say Peter Nguyen was probably involved, was a big factor in that. He drove me there. There was a lot of youth apostle guys.
Right, yeah. So for those of you who don't know, what is the youth apostles?
Wow, we totally went off on a tangent there.
Yeah.
So youth apostles is the technical term is a mixed religious association of the faithful. So it's a religious community where we have priests, lay brothers, and of course consecrated. So I am a lay brother, not consecrated and not going to be a priest unless God slaps me across the back of the head and says you're getting it all wrong. But that's a topic for another time. So we have a community house, and we have lived by some of the apostolic evangelical conventions. If I'm remembering the term right. Wow, I'm totally spacing. Put a microphone in front of me and suddenly I get all dumb. Anyway.
It's not as bad as when I tried to record shows alone. It's so much harder to talk in front of a camera than it is to talk to a person.
Yes. That's fair. But really the focus of the community is serving the youth. So we're involved in a lot of youth ministries. Obviously, John Moore, for a long time, his dedicated youth ministry was the Catholic Campus Ministry at Mason. Yeah. Throughout Arlington Diocese, there's a lot of different high school youth ministries that are run by youth apostles or have youth apostle volunteers.
Right.
Like I'm over at St. Anthony, being a volunteer at their youth ministry.
Yeah. And, I used to be with you.
I'm talking to the...
I am aware.
Potentially multiple digits of viewers. Who knows?
This podcast is going to get big, Brian, all right? I'm going to have dozens of people listening. Just you wait. So, it sounds like, youth ministry has been like a really big part of your life.
This is true.
Both growing up and also, later on being a youth minister. And yet, like, I think you've probably heard the statistic that, like, 80% of kids who go to college lose their faith in college. So, what do you think, like, do you think that is an issue of, like, youth ministry programs in the United States? Do you think that it's just, the secular culture is just too pervasive, there's nothing we can do? Like, what's sort of your take on this as a youth apostle,
So, for the record... Not an expert, not a psychologist. That's not my field. But from my experience, one, I'd be curious to see what the rate then is after college, people coming back into the faith. Would be a curious thing, and I don't know that statistic.
I don't have that off the top of my head either.
But, I mean, yes, and yes. Yes, it's a problem of our youth ministries across the country. Like, to be honest with you, a lot of places kind of take it for granted. Youth ministry isn't a priority in a lot of places, even though it really should be foundational.
Yeah.
In my opinion, to, you got the sacraments, obviously.
Right, yeah.
The highest, the Eucharist, sourcing someone to the faith. And you got charity and, good works, also very important. But youth ministry should be right up there with, your charities and your good works, because if we can't do a spiritual work of mercy and actually look after the souls of our kids, like...
Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's really wonderful that, like, Bishop Burbage, I think, is very much
great job
on that page. Like, one of, like, his primary things is, like, making sure that anybody who wants to attend a Catholic school can do that. He's invested a lot in, like, Catholic education and youth ministry and campus ministry programs to sort of, like, stop that bleeding. And I think that he's done a pretty good job of it. There's only so much a bishop can do.
This is true. Like, he does a great job, and I think overall Arlington Diocese does a great job. And if you notice, a lot of priests coming out of Arlington Diocese.
Yeah, we're
doing very well.
We had
relatively
eight
speaking,
priests ordained this past summer. Yeah, 8 priests it was.
It's great.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that in any given diocese there aren't people working very well and very hard, and there aren't great programs there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do think that there is a problem of limited resources and priorities, and we need to recognize everywhere in the church that youth ministry has to be one of the top priorities.
Yeah, I think that, honestly, one of the biggest problems when it comes to, like, youth and catechesis and things is that shortly after the Second Vatican Council, and we're not going to go too far down that rabbit hole.
That's a hole you might dig yourself there.
But I think that after the Second Vatican Council, there was sort of a dropping of the ball a little bit as far as, like, really faithfully teaching the truths of the Catholic faith. There was sort of a de-emphasis of teaching the Catholic faith in a really strong way, and more of an emphasis on interreligious dialogue, which, of course, interreligious dialogue is fine and good. But what I've found is that...
Depends on the dialogue, but yeah.
I mean, fair. So, the catechism states that parents are the first catechists, right?
Yeah.
And what I've found in like, doing catechesis and sponsoring young people and doing this youth ministry is, unfortunately, many parents now are not super they're not super well catechized themselves.
That's fair.
And so they can't, like, properly catechize their children. And so it's basically left to the religious education classes, which, when you've got, 30 students and one teacher, you can't necessarily give the students the sort of attention and instruction that they would really need to sort of take the faith to heart and make it their own.
I do also think that there is just an overall societal trend of parents kind of ceding responsibility for any form of education, and I think, unfortunately, that does bleed over into catechesis. In that, like,
it is starting to kick back, though. Like, especially after COVID, like many more people are homeschooling, and a lot more people are choosing, like, Catholic schools and private schools and stuff. So I think that there is a bit of a reversal of that trend of parents taking a more active role in
I'm
their
not saying anything
education.
against, like, public school. I'm not saying, like, homeschool versus public school. I'm more meaning, I feel like at some point parents started to rely on public education for more than science, writing, and, like, those things that, I don't expect a parent to be able to teach, every kid calculus, not expected, or even algebra. Parents shouldn't be expected to be able to teach well, those kinds of things. But I think at a certain point, we also kind of gave up on parents teaching civics, moral guidance, health, like how to keep a checkbook, home economics, kind of things that are kind of something that parents should be doing every day and should be talking with their kids about on occasion. And, like, those kind of basic life skills that, I don't know, I feel like in my household was a lot from the parents, secondarily from school. Obviously government and things like that taught civics, but that's not where I got my government values from.
Right, yeah.
That's not where I got my, what it means to be American from. School.
Right, yeah.
Like, that and that shouldn't be. But I feel like we're getting way off topic here because I like to ramble. Sorry.
No, it's good.
And I think that bleeds over into catechesis. That the idea that, there is an RE program, so...
Right, that it's their job to teach the faith. I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean...
if we want to go off on a tangent, could also be related to the fact that people don't tend to be comfortable talking about religious topics anymore in public.
That's
so if you
also
don't
true.
Talk about it a lot, you don't really have a lot of confidence in teaching it.
That's also true, and that's another thing I was going to say is that there are a limited number of people who are really competent in teaching theology, especially with the shortage of priests that we have nowadays in most dioceses. And I talk up the Arlington diocese a lot. We are very blessed to have the number of priests that we do, but it's not like we're swimming in priests.
That's true. That's true.
And so there are a limited number of people who can really faithfully teach, or not so much even faithfully teach as much as really. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Can teach it in a lot of detail and effectively. Thank you. I don't know why I lost that word.
You're good. Like I said, sitting in front of a camera and a microphone, suddenly it gets all complicated.
It's not like I don't lose my train of thought when we're just talking normally. You can't blame everything on the camera, Brian.
That's fair.
So, I think that I remember I was sponsoring this one girl, and she was asking me questions about things that her religious education teacher said that weren't quite, that they weren't wrong, but it was just that it was missing some nuance that I had to sort of clarify for her. And I think that now if you're in a classroom, you don't necessarily... Nuance is hard, right?
Nuance is hard.
Which is why I think that young people need sort of individual mentors who they can talk to about theology and sort of get those answers. I remember I was talking to a few of the confirmation kids at St. John's, and it was clear that they didn't want to be there, that they were just going to those youth ministry events that they had to attend in order to get confirmed. And so I asked them why they wanted to be confirmed, and it was because their parents wanted it. That they didn't really care. And I asked them, well, do you believe what the church teaches? Do you believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, for instance? And they were both just yeah, of course we do. And I asked, well, why? How do you know that that's true? How do you know that, Hinduism isn't true, Buddhism, Islam, all of these other religions? How do you know that the Catholic faith is true and the others are false? And it was just I don't. And I was just so why do you say you believe what the church teaches if you don't know that it's true? And he said, because it's just how I was raised, and so that there's no actual undergirding to the actual theology. There's no sort of deeper understanding of why do we believe? And I think that that's one of the sort of shortcomings of catechesis in the United States, is that there's honestly not enough apologetics, and I realize I have a love for apologetics, and so I'm biased. But quite frankly, when kids go out into the world and they meet a secular world that is actively hostile to their faith, and they will get bombarded with these questions, if they don't know how to answer them, or if they don't even have a strong impression that the answers are out there, they're just going to drop their faith because there was no foundation in the first place.
I mean, yeah, I agree with you there. I do want to point out that not everyone has as rational a logical mind as you.
That is true.
So for some people, encounter can be that undergirding.
Yeah, absolutely.
It needs to be both. Don't get me wrong.
Right? Yeah.
I'm not saying, but I'm just saying.
I'm not one of those guys that throws shade at praise and worship or something like that. I think that that's incredibly valuable, especially for young people. I think that young people really resonate to that sort of praise and worship, even if it's not my personal cup of tea.
Sure.
I think it's incredibly important, and is a wonderful expression of like love and
Agreed.
fidelity to the Lord. It does it does make me chuckle a little bit when some sort of like very traditional people like basically trash praise and worship sometimes, because it's just like it's too Protestant. I'm just like, of all of the errors of Protestantism, their propensity for singing wishy-washy songs about Jesus, it's not one of them. You know?
Well, I do think you need to choose songs carefully, because I feel like
some
of them are, insert love song about a girl. What's the old joke? It's failed artists trying to release love songs, and they're just like, if I put Jesus in there, then
right, yeah. I think that there's also like some praise and worship songs that I've heard is all about like, I love you, Jesus, for all the things you do for me, like for the comfort you give me, and like, of course, Jesus does comfort us, he does support us, but that's not why we praise and worship him.
This is true.
Right? There's something deeper there. The song should be about God, not about me,
Very true. Very true.
So, I want to pivot a little bit here.
Yeah, we're way off topic.
No, that's great.
I do want to say one other thing about the college. It is very natural for a high school or college student to challenge. Like, that's part of growing up. So I think we also see a lot of that reason there, is that when they go to high school, when they go to college, they're gonna challenge what they grew up with.
Right, yeah.
And that's gonna be
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we also need to be careful not to be afraid of that. Mm-hmm. I think there is this kind of, sometimes when we're talking with people people falling away from the faith, there's this fear of kid going to college and questioning their faith and going and trying other, like, that's a normal part of development.
Right.
Kids out of the house for the first time, they're gonna go challenge, they're gonna go try things, right? They're gonna go challenge their faith. They're gonna,
right.
They're suddenly released from their parents,
right.
auspices. Of course, they're gonna explore and be confused and things like that. That's normal. And that's okay.
Right. It's not okay to fall away, though.
It's not okay to fall away. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that, like, if we try and restrict that too much and be like, oh no, you can't, go out and push, and you can't explore, and you can't question, which I think is what some people end up doing, is they say, okay, you can't question, you can't, do that, because then they're worried about that,
Right, yeah.
Then it's just going to make it worse.
I think that there definitely is a sentiment of that sometimes.
Right.
And, like, that's something that I obviously am not a fan of, because, like, I was asking these kids, like, why do you even, like, I was the one challenging their faith,
is good.
To try to, like, find out what deeper is there. Because, like, you have to dig into that.
Right.
Otherwise, like, you're the seed spread on shallow soil, right? And then, like, it springs up and then withers away at the first sign of trouble, right?
Right. And so my only point is, you can't be afraid of them challenging. You can't be afraid of them questioning. You have to be there with a response and support.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We should encourage those questions, like, during middle and high school.
Exactly. Yes.
When they are still, they still have easy access to those answers. This
is true.
Yeah.
And on college campuses, I think being there and being present.
Right.
I think college ministry is very important.
Oh, it's absolutely pivotal.
Yeah. Okay, so you were pivoting, I assume, to our actual topic.
No, like, there's no actual topic. Like, I brought you on here because you are a scientist, and I wanted to discuss abortion from a scientific perspective. Yeah. Especially not too long ago, there was Lila Rose was on Dr. Phil. Did you see that video?
I actually did not. I heard about it, but I haven't actually seen it.
So she actually did a phenomenal job, because it's Lila Rose. Of course she did.
Sure.
And I think that there was one exchange, though, where Lila is basically pointing out the fact that, scientifically speaking, life begins at conception.
Yes.
Right? And that there's no serious scientific debate on that point. And Dr. Phil was
95%, I believe, was the study I saw.
It depends on the study. It ranges from between, like, 93 and 97%.
Yeah.
But there have been a lot of surveys on this.
Right.
And I think I was talking to you one time, and you said that, like, the 5% or whatever that didn't agree? Like, what was their
You're
situation?
Get me in trouble, aren't you? So,
hey, Pope Francis says, "Don't be afraid to make a mess." Right?
fair.
So the gospel got Jesus in trouble.
So,
it should get us in trouble a little bit too.
I can look up the study in particular if you want to go that in depth. But the study I was looking at was like a 95% overall. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, the guy who was doing the study got a lot of like emails, messages afterwards that are that from the pro-choice scientists that were like,
right.
"Hey, I don't want you to use this to imply that I believe," And
right,
like,
yeah.
They were like, they assumed based off of the question that it was going to be a pro-life, pro-choice thing.
Right,
which,
yeah.
I mean, to be fair,
it kind of
is central to the
that is central to the debate.
question.
Yeah.
So when you have that much pushback with people who say, yes, life begins at conception, but I don't want you to, construe this as me saying this. I mean, let's be honest here. 5% being a certain portion of that, I'm sure, said no specifically because they had that debate in mind, rather than reflecting on the actual scientific understanding of what life is.
Right, yeah. I think I remember you saying something along the lines of the scientists who said no basically just wrote in like, that it's technically true, but I don't like the question.
Well, that's what I was saying with people who responded yes, was a lot of them later, included an email to the guy and said,
right,
yes, life begins at conception, but I don't like the question or something like that. So I'm saying that I assume that some portion of that 5% answered no because they didn't like the question.
Yeah, probably. So, Dr. Phil, in responding to Lila Rose, he basically said that there's no scientific consensus. Like,
flat out wrong.
So some scientists say that life begins at 20 weeks. Some say that life begins at the heartbeat.
That's straight up wrong. I'm sorry. I have no other statement other than that straight up wrong. If you look at the scientific definition of life, it begins at conception.
Okay, what is the scientific definition of life?
So the scientific definition of life, there's several different things that we use to assess. So
right.
Some form of movement, response to stimuli, taking in energy, eliminating waste.
Eliminating waste?
Yeah. Growth and development, some way of dealing with waste.
I see. Okay.
I can look up the actual, full list of definition of life if you would like.
Yeah, so I'm remembering this from like high school biology.
Yeah, this is high school biology stuff.
But it's like grow and develop, reproduce.
Capacity for reproduction is
right,
a very important distinction there.
Right, we don't say that like babies are not alive simply because they are not yet capable of reproduction. Or somebody who's sterile is not alive because they personally cannot reproduce.
And so these are also, it's important to note that definition is also for over a developmental cycle.
I see.
And we need to be, and again, from a scientific perspective, we're looking at an organism over its developmental cycle. We recognize that organisms grow and develop.
Right. That's one of the
one of the key,
yes.
key categories there.
Yeah.
So it's capacity for reproduction at some point. Just for the record. I've seen people use some weird arguments before. Just so.
What kinds of stuff have you heard?
Oh, well, so first there was the not fully developed, arguing that they don't meet all of the criteria for like response to stimuli, for example.
I mean that. So
yeah,
I'm not a scientist, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But like the embryo, it responds to stimuli when it basically when it knows to implant on the uterine wall.
110%.
Do you know how it actually detects like when it exits the fallopian tube?
Ooh, like I said, my expertise is not embryology. I'm gonna be perfectly honest and upfront with that. Not my expertise in embryology, so I don't know off the top of my head how it implants on the uterine wall. Another thing I could look up if we want to go down that road.
I mean, that's okay.
I feel confident in my ability to look that up quickly and read through some scientific papers on the fly. But yeah, I don't know that off the top of my head, but it does migrate down the fallopian tube and implant on the uterine wall,
Right, yeah.
of course.
I would have to imagine there's just something in the environment, maybe a change in pH that the embryo picks up on, or it could just be spouting
or chemical
nonsense.
signaling.
There's got to be something though.
There's signaling,
right?
yeah.
Otherwise,
We
ectopic
understand.
pregnancies would just happen all the time, right?
Yeah. Which is another topic we can definitely go down that road in. But yeah, from a scientific definition, there is no other consistent line to draw for when a life begins, because it's an individual. And then I should say that I think that's the more important question, is when does it become an individual? Because at that point, at fertilization, you have a unique genetic code,
Right.
that is created and is an individual of the species.
I see. And individual is like a scientific term.
Right.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, it's for a single creature out of the species. So if you have a herd of elk, one single elk is an individual of the population.
And you do research with like mice, and each mouse is like, you refer to it as a mouse individual, right?
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We
We don't normally designate it as such, because that's way too much time to write individual for each. Yes, individual one. No, we just call it, we generally call it M1.
M1. Okay, fair enough.
But yes, it is an individual in the
Yeah.
population.
So why is the key question individuality rather than something that's like, like more philosophical, like personhood? Because like what I always say is that the question, and this is my personal opinion, but like the question of abortion, I think that like obviously the science can tell us like that, at the moment of conception we have a unique human individual,
Living human individual.
right? Yes, but it can't necessarily tell us. I don't think science can tell us that it's wrong to murder, right? That's beyond the capacity of science, and so the question of abortion is not so much a question of science. Like we know the science, it can help us sort of inform our philosophy, but it's fundamentally a philosophical and theological question, right?
Well, yes, it can be theological, or it can just be, if we want to take it out of the realm of religion, which is fair. Religion should still inform,
right, yeah.
But from
in the words of I might butcher this quote, but John Paul II said, life certainly has a sacred and religious value, but by no means is that value a concern only of believers.
Yes.
The dignity of every human life is something that everyone can grasp by the light of reason. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit because I don't have the line memorized, but yeah, it's not religious, but like philosophy and theology are just inseparably intertwined in my mind.
And to have any sort of functioning societal moral code,
right?
We have to have some influence from morality, which is a religious, perspective. In order to have any sort of functioning law,
right?
There has to be a set of morals we can at least bare minimum agree on, and not murdering people, I think, is pretty foundational to that.
Fair enough. So the question for me, I think, as far as abortion, is to sort of give people who are pro-choice as much rope as possible.
Sure.
Okay, that's maybe not the
best.
The end of that expression, right? Okay, probably not the best. So to give them as much leeway as possible, to give them as much sort of credit and benefit of the doubt. I think that the question is not so much when does life begin, because they lose that argument immediately.
Right, scientifically speaking.
The question is at what point does personhood begin?
So
at what point does a person gain individual rights, and which rights do they develop at different times?
So I think that is not an argument that people can make. Because I think as soon as you remove it from an individual person is a person, an individual of the human species is a person, as soon as you remove that, then you can justify anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as you say that it's not a hard line that a human being is a person, like that should be a hard line. A human being is a person. Anything other than that, you can justify any atrocity you want. Like there is... You've now detached it from the line. You can move it anywhere you want. There's no other consistent place you can draw a line that someone else isn't going to move it, you know? And sure, it might be fine for you where you draw the line, but once you're drawing the line and not relying on the furthest possible extent of what is reasonable for defining people, like you're entering into dangerous
Humanity
territory.
has a very dicey history of deciding which people
Are people.
and which ones are not. Yeah,
very problematic. And again, and that's part of why I said that I think the fact that it's an individual is very important. Because we don't treat people as a collective, and it's not a part of a person. It's not a clump of cells. It's not the same as like a tumor or that you could say.
So it's not the same as a tumor, but it is kind of if you really think about it, we're all just clumps of cells.
It's a clump of cells in the same way that you are a clump of cells, in the same way that I am a clump of cells.
Well, not exactly, because we're just further along in our development, right?
Yes.
But like,
you are also a clump of cells.
The fact that we are a clump of cells doesn't mean that they are not mutually exclusive categories between person and clump of cells. Right. Yeah.
But it's not a clump of my cells that just happen to be in a
exactly
area. You know,
right.
It's not like if I cut off a finger, the finger obviously doesn't have personhood, even if
it's still
to
alive
keep
for a
it
little
alive.
while. Yeah, exactly.
You know, through which we can do. I mean, that's an organ transplant, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So even if you do that, like, it could still meet the technical definition of living, but it's not individual. So that's what I'm saying is that I think for personhood, the only line you can draw that's a reasonable line is human, individual, living.
Okay.
So the only line that makes any sense.
Let me ask you a question. I'm going to ask you to play devil's advocate a little bit here.
So,
what do you think is sort of the best pro-abortion argument, and where do you think it falls short?
Oh.
If you had to make a pro-choice argument, what argument would you make?
Well, there's a legalistic one that, this is absolutely horrifying, but is an argument that has some actual legal ground, is to say that, well, it doesn't matter because a fetus is not born, therefore it does not meet the criteria for American citizen, therefore it is not entitled to protections under constitutional and American law. Right. Like, that's an argument that's has some weight. It's absolutely horrifying.
Right. I mean, like, I would actually agree with that argument on a constitutional basis. I don't think that the unborn... I think it's unfortunate that the unborn don't have the protections of the Constitution, because the Constitution says born or naturalized.
Right.
And so it makes it very clear that, like, you got to be born in order for the Constitution to apply to you.
Right.
I would fully support amending the Constitution to protect human life from the moment of conception until natural death.
So as far as, like, an argument, that's
a
strong argument, but from a very legalistic, finding a loophole in the lie or loophole in the law argument, but also doesn't cover the fact that in pretty much all laws in the country, it doesn't matter if you're a citizen or not, you can't be murdered.
Right.
So there's one. I guess another argument that I find somewhat challenging, I can see where people are approaching it, is arguing it almost from a self-defense-ish type perspective.
Right, yeah.
Of saying, like, well, even if it is a person, they're taking something from me, therefore I have a right to end that.
Right, yeah.
Is an argument that I've heard that is,
I think that is actually my favorite pro-abortion argument, and I say that not because I'm pro-abortion or anything.
No. But I think everyone who knows you and understands this podcast understands where you're coming.
Fair enough. I do want to make it clear though.
Fair enough.
The argument that I always found sort of most compelling from the when I'm playing devil's advocate is basically saying that the embryo has essentially taken up residence in his mother's uterus without her permission, and therefore she is free at any time to revoke the embryo's rights to her uterus. And in theory, you could impose a law requiring the embryo to be, put into, or the fetus at that point to be put into an artificial womb once we get the technology, or into prenatal care if it's or the NICU rather. Once it's far enough developed, but basically the argument that the fetus is illegally taken up residence where they don't have a natural right to be, which that they absolutely have a natural right to be there.
That's where some of the argument falls apart right there.
Right, exactly. But that basically it's sort of like, just as you have a right to defend your property, from anybody who would intrude upon it without right, you have a right to defend your body from somebody who is intruding upon it, even if they are fully human. And sure. What I think that one mistake that some pro-life apologists make when I sort of make that devil's advocate argument is almost always they end up saying, well, if you consent to intercourse, then you are consenting to at least the possibility of pregnancy.
I mean, that's not wrong.
It's not wrong, but then where does the conversation immediately go after that?
Sure.
Well, what if the woman didn't consent?
Right.
What if it was a situation of force? And the fact of the matter is that our argument does not hinge upon consent, right? It's about the fundamental right of every human being to live.
Right.
And so I think that making an argument that will inevitably steer you off into steer you really away from the essential questions is not a good argument to make, especially when you end up in like a really emotional space, because
you need to be careful about that.
The argument about, well, what if the woman didn't consent? It's not rationally a super good argument, but it is an incredibly emotionally resonant one. And so it's something that a lot of people really struggle to respond to without, seeming uncaring or unfeeling.
This is true. But yeah, I do think that you need to be able to pivot away from that, because as tragic and terrible as that is,
right,
it's not the main discussion.
Right.
Like, I don't think it's wrong to talk about horrible cases of rape in the context of this, but we need to keep in mind that it's a very small percentage of what we're discussing. Follows a very, very small percentage of abortion cases.
Sure.
So if we're let me put it this way: if we made an exception for that one specific situation, we still wouldn't agree.
Right, yeah.
We would still be having this debate.
Yeah.
So as I think it's good to acknowledge, discuss, and have that conversation, but
yeah,
we need to focus on the main issue. Right.
One strategy that I've used in discussions like this is that, because people love to bring up, what if the woman didn't consent? What about the cases of rape? And I always start by saying, obviously, that's a heinous crime. Yes. that causes severe damage that outlasts everyone involved, but in that situation there are three people involved. You have the victim, the perpetrator, and the child. Of the three of them, who committed a heinous crime? And
perpetrator,
right? The perpetrator. So then why should
be locked up for life?
Yes.
I'm sorry,
yes.
We're way too lenient.
Yeah, it's the one crime that makes me question my stance on the death penalty.
Fair point.
But I always say, so, why is it that the child should die in that case? And typically they'll pivot back to, well, it's not a child, it's not a baby, they're not a person. And so now we're back on the main question. And so basically, if you say, hold on, that there are several people here, it would be horribly heinous to kill the victim to end her suffering. Why are we trying to kill another innocent party to try to reduce the suffering of the victim? If anyone deserves to die, and I'm not saying that we should necessarily kill all rapists. I wouldn't lose sleep over it, but if anybody deserves to die in that situation,
kill anyone when we have the option of imprisoning them. Just saying. I know.
It's a prudential matter.
There are.
We can go down that rabbit hole some other time.
Yes, but in our current society, we have the option.
I do agree.
Anyway,
but I don't feel strongly enough about it to really lose sleep over rapists being executed. Like,
okay, fine. I agree
like
with you there.
I would oppose it, but I wouldn't like it wouldn't be top of my mind if
wouldn't sway your vote in an election.
Not really, no.
Anyway, but we'll we can circle back to that some other time if we want. What were you saying?
I do not remember.
Well, okay. So I guess if I'm playing devil's advocate, let's in. So you were talking about bringing it back to it's a child, it's a
right, yeah.
But that doesn't answer the original question that we started with, which is why does that not still constitute a unwanted presence in a person's environment? As you were saying, like the baby has taken up residence in the uterus without consent. Well, why can they not remove it?
So the reason they cannot remove it is, like, one, the baby, even if the woman did not give permission, like the baby does have a natural right to live in the mother's womb, because that is its natural place, And the other thing I would say is that even if the embryo doesn't have a natural right to its mother's womb, then that doesn't necessarily mean that it is an appropriate use of force to use lethal force in that case.
Sure.
Like if somebody trespasses on your property, it is not necessarily okay to shoot them in the head unless they pose some like actual threat, right? And so
kid playing on your lawn does not qualify.
Exactly. Like, yeah. And so, it is not acceptable to use excessive force. And so I would describe even conceding, which I would not concede, but even if I were to concede that the child doesn't have a right to his mother's uterus, it would still stand to reason that one would use the minimum force necessary to resolve the situation, which would be then, letting the baby grow and then just performing a C-section or something like that. Yeah.
I would also like to additionally add that there is a parental responsibility. Mm-hmm. We recognize that all the time in legal and social environment, that there is a responsibility. And yes, you can seed up for adoption, but you can't just leave your child in the middle of your living room and not take care of it.
Right.
That's child neglect.
You can leave your child at like a fire station in a lot of states.
But that's been a specific carve-out to allow someone to cede their parental responsibility in such a way.
Right.
You can't just leave it on the side of the road.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Like that would be murder. And we recognize that fact.
Right, yeah.
Exactly. And as different scale as it is, it does legally create a requirement for a parent to demand on their time, resources, physical nature, ability to take the child to a place where it can be taken care of.
Right, yeah.
And if that's the extent of the parental responsibility, then that's the bare minimum of the parental responsibility.
Right. It's absolutely legitimate for the state to impose certain natural obligations on individuals. The idea that we can just go about doing whatever we want and we have and the state has no business interfering in enforcing certain necessary responsibilities and obligations that we have as individuals and as members of a society is ridiculous. The government makes all sorts of such demands.
Right. Speed limits.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
What's the old saying? My right to swing my arm stops at your face.
Right. I can swing my fist until it lands on your nose.
Right.
Exactly.
When someone's right to live, and that comes in conflict with other rights, we have to draw the line. And as much as I would love that not to be necessary, it clearly is necessary for us to actually draw that line.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
So I think that's also an important note.
Yeah. Now, you and I could easily talk for hours, and indeed we have done that on many occasions. This is just the first time that we've recorded and filmed it.
This is fair. Yeah, that's who knows what'll happen with that with your dozens of viewers. But
yeah, who knows? I mean, I'd love to have you back on sometime,
sure.
but I think I know that you have to leave.
Yeah,
and I think that the podcast is starting to drag on a little bit.
Hi, people.
So thank you so much, Brian, for coming,
my friend.
And to anybody who may be listening, be sure to like and subscribe or do whatever podcast things that people say. I'm still new to this.
And subscribe on a podcast?
I mean, this is going on YouTube too.
Ah, fun.
Yeah, I'm going like YouTube, Spotify,
hello, YouTube,
Apple Podcasts,
YouTubians.
YouTubians.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
I mean, I was going to say YouTubers, but that's like the supply side.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess.
This part's probably going to get cut out. Hi, people.
Probably not, It's good to have some personality every once in a while,
Oh, depends on whose personality you're talking about.
That is an excellent point. I have been...
Small doses of you, my friend. Small doses.
My older sister once said that I have a tendency to overwhelm people with my Davide-ness.
Oh, she has. Your sister is quite intelligent.
I mean, all my family are geniuses. My parents both went to MIT, and like my older sisters are engineers. People don't believe me when I say I'm the dumb one of my family, but it's absolutely true.
I could be more mean to you, but I don't have the heart for it.
All right, thank you guys.
Anyway,
thank you guys so much for joining us for this conversation, and I will see you around next week, I guess. Sorry.
Oh. Is that you want to close in a prayer or something, or I don't know?
I wasn't planning on it. Would you like to close in a prayer, Brian?
I mean, I just figured it would be a nice natural end to Doctrine. What is it? Doctrine, Dogma, and Davide?
Yes, that's correct. Okay. All right, Brian, lead us in a prayer.
In the Father,
and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Glory be to the Father,
and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, thanks, guys. Bye.
Have a good night.